Now speaking to you from the control room of Studio 41 is the editor of See It Now, Edward R. Murrow.
Good evening. Last week they handed out the Pulitzer Prizes. The gold medals went not to a great metropolitan newspaper, but to two weekly papers in North Carolina. One has a circulation of 1,700, the other has a circulation of 5,000. Their editors decided to fight and expose the Ku Klux Klan.
This was a big deal in 1953 in the Border Belt, and it's still an extraordinary story. The news reporter of Whiteville and another small-town weekly paper, the Tabor City Tribune, became the first non-daily newspapers to win the prestigious Pulitzer for Public Service. Whiteville and Tabor City are 20 miles apart, both in Columbus County, North Carolina.
This is Whiteville, the county seat. Near here, the Grand Dragon operated. A man was killed, a house burned, and perhaps 50 citizens flogged. This is the courthouse, where the Klan leaders were tried and convicted.
Think of it, small-town papers in the Jim Crow South taking a bold and risky stand for justice in their communities. And this was before the civil rights movement really gained steam, before Brown v. Board of Education, before the Montgomery bus boycott. The editors of the Whiteville and Tabor City newspapers waged campaigns against the Klan for several years in news articles and editorials. They exposed the Klan's meetings and recruiting efforts, its kidnappings and beatings of black and white people, and its ties to local police departments. After federal and state investigations, their reporting culminated in the conviction of over 100 Klansmen, according to the Pulitzers.
Well, y'all come in and have a seat, and can we get you something to drink or snack?
Les High lives in a quiet neighborhood in Whiteville. He was born and raised here. He's in his 60s now. His grandfather, Leslie Thompson, bought the News Reporter in 1938. He was the owner and publisher when it won the Pulitzer in '53.
That's my grandfather's obituary. I can screenshot this for you and get it to you.
Les pages through a scrapbook at his dining room table.
My grandfather believed in justice and social justice back in a time where it probably wasn't that popular to do so. But he and Horace Carter in Tabor City, despite economic threats, boycotts of advertising, cancellations, that type of thing, persevered.
High's father, Jim, inherited the paper and ran it for decades. As a teenager, Les took photos for the News Reporter. He then joined the family business after college, eventually becoming editor and owner. He tells me the 1980s were a heyday for Whiteville, with its strong tobacco economy, and for the News Reporter.
It's been said many times that to have a strong community, you've got to have a strong newspaper. And so we did have a strong newspaper, and we had a strong community. And we went to all the meetings, and we reported them faithfully and fully and fairly, but we didn't hold back either.
Things deteriorated, High says, with the Great Recession and the rise of digital platforms like Facebook that took away the paper's advertisers, the familiar national story. By 2021, his paper's readership had declined by more than a third, along with his reporting staff, which went from 9 to 6. He and his family didn't want to cut any more of their longtime reporters.
So essentially what happened is we just really cut our salaries a lot and what we took out of the paper to at least try to keep it even. Our profits were low.
In 2021, High's family sold the News Reporter, not to the newspaper chain that now owns the Bladen Journal in the next county or other papers in the area. He sold it to his young editor, who was determined to keep the News Reporter independent and locally owned, and has done so. As for Les, he didn't retire. He started a new online journalistic venture, the Border Belt Independent. Chenjerai, let's bring you in here.
Hey, John.
We're going to hear more from Les about the Border Belt Independent in just a minute. But it's an example of what we're here to talk about in this last episode of the season. How can we, any and all of us, respond to our news crisis in the U.S.?
Yes, here we are. Last episode. And I like the fact that we started by hearing about that Pulitzer Prize-winning work that those small newspapers did back in the 1950s. It's like, yeah, man, that's something journalism could do, right? You know, really just holding people accountable, fighting for justice. And it's a good reminder of why we need good journalism so badly.
We always have, and I imagine we always will, right? We've spent this season talking about the fact that we don't have nearly enough good journalism, and we have far too much bad journalism in the U.S. these days.
And most people would agree with that. But we've also built a case for why our news media is failing. And that has a lot to do with our reliance on an overwhelmingly corporate, for-profit industry, and the fact that we don't treat journalism as an essential public good that has to be nurtured, supported, and protected.
Chenj, when our team was talking about how to approach this last episode, which is about how to move forward, given everything we've shown here, you proposed a way of structuring our reporting and our thinking. Talk about journalistic transparency. I'm out here sharing our episode outline with the people. But you talked about 3 buckets, kind of 3 categories of action that we need to be talking about here.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at the overall, landscape of what we're up against, it just could feel totally overwhelming. But I do think it's possible to sort of discern 3 things that we have to do if we're going to find our way to a news and information system that's worthy of a real democracy. First, journalism has to survive in the face of economic and political forces that are trying to kill it off.
Okay, job 1, survive.
Second, I think we sort of have to imagine the journalism we want. We don't want to just be trapped in survival mode, right? We think folks want to think about what is the positive vision, that we can realize. What do we want our journalism to be? And so, yeah, I think that has to be the second step.
Item number 2, imagine something better.
And third, I think we have to fight. I mean, we've talked about the forces that are arrayed against us. No one has ever gotten justice in the sort of rights that we have now by just waiting for them to emerge, right? We literally have to build the power that we're going to need to win these fights. In organizing world, we say you only win what you organize for.
Third, build power. All right, sounds good to me. So let's do it. From the Kenan Institute for Ethics at Duke University, this is Scene on Radio, Season 8, The News, Episode 8. I'm John Biewen, host and producer of the show.
I'm Chenjerai Kumanyika, John's co-host for this season. I'm a journalism professor and media scholar at New York University and a podcast maker and organizer.
And Chenj, we're going to have you stay with me through this episode. We can talk about stuff as we go. So let's get to it. And that first item, survival.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important for people to understand that, with all these attacks on journalism, both the kind of corporate attacks where people are getting laid off, but also explicit political attacks, right, on these institutions, that folks are fighting to survive, figuring out how to still produce good journalism and face up to all these threats, including, even things like technology. So, yeah, there's a lot of good work being done, and we should talk about it.
And that brings us back to Whiteville, North Carolina, and Les High.
I started the Board Belt Independent in 2021 before we sold the News Reporter.
As the publisher and owner of his family's paper, Les had lived the collapse of the business model for local news. He wanted to restore some of what had been lost.
Back in the day, if I reported on a school board story and I heard something that just didn't sound right, then I could take a few days, 2 or 3 days, to check that out. And now they're just moving on to the next story, and then the next story, and then the next story. There is no time to do investigative reporting. So I was thinking, how can a small community have this watchdog in their community, their newspaper, could we start a nonprofit to augment what they're doing and already doing in these small communities, even though it's greatly diminished?
High made a pitch to a North Carolina-based foundation, the Kate B. Reynolds Charitable Trust. The fortune that established the foundation came from tobacco, the R.J. Reynolds Company, and from a slaveholding history in that family. The Kate B. Reynolds Trust was not a news funder at the time. It mostly makes grants related to health and economic issues.
We asked the question, if Kate B. Reynolds is trying to help people, and as a newspaper we're trying to help our communities, how can we do that? How can we make people's lives better if nobody knows what those issues are or nobody cares what those issues are? And unless you have trustful, reliable news where people can hear about these issues, and then at that point when you know about them or care about them, then you can move forward and try to find solutions to those problems. And that's really where it started.
Reynolds made a 3-year grant of just under $500,000 to start the Border Belt Independent. The foundation renewed for another 3 years in 2024. The Independent got another smaller grant from Press Forward, an organization that supports local newsrooms. The Border Belt's 3 journalists, with help from freelancers, cover 4 counties, the same counties we've reported from this season. They've written, for example, about the Lumbee tribe and its campaign for federal recognition, and about the risk of a measles outbreak in the Border Belt.
One of the nice things about what we're doing now is that we can if it takes 2 weeks to do a story, then it takes 2 weeks.
Remember back in episode 2, the story of the Bladen Journal printing that outrageous misinformation the day before the 2024 election about undocumented immigrants voting? I learned the basics of that incident from the Border Belt Independent. And this is key to understanding the Independent and its goals. Les tells me many of its articles appear in the region's local newspapers, including his old paper, The News Reporter, but also those bare-bones papers in the neighboring counties, the Bladen Journal, the Robisonian, the Laurinburg Exchange.
Our stories are published on our website, which is borderbelt.org. We have a weekly newsletter that goes out. We have social media channels. But one thing I think that's been really important is that we essentially are a news service, a free news service for the papers in the community. And the idea was that we would give them extra added value so they could survive. And we don't sell advertising because we don't want to compete with those newspapers. So it worked both ways. It allowed them to have stories that they couldn't write, but it allowed us a bigger audience for us to get our stories out to the public.
I want to highlight what Les just said. The Border Belt Independent gives its articles to the newspapers in the area for free. And it doesn't sell advertising at all, so they don't have to take advertising dollars that the for-profit newspapers need. I mean, that's really something.
In yet another collaborative move, the Border Belt Independent, the BBI, joined forces with the Assembly. That's a growing statewide for-profit news organization founded in 2021 and based in Durham, North Carolina. Becoming part of the Assembly gave the BBI a more sustainable financial footing, and it adds to its audience because some independent articles appear in the Assembly.
Collaboration is so important now because, again, back in the day when it was blood sport and we were all competing, that's not going to come back because of the fiscal difficulties.
Chens, this is something you hear from people who are working to repair our crumbling news media, especially at the local level. You hear a lot about people replacing the old way of doing things, the competition for readers, listeners, and advertiser dollars, replacing that with collaboration.
That makes a lot of sense. As we just heard, sometimes nonprofit and for-profit outlets are partnering. And some partnerships cross mediums, say public broadcasters joining forces with local newspapers. That's happened in places like Oregon and around Dallas, Texas.
Of course, there's a lot of nonprofit journalism out there, and we should highlight it because we've been talking so much about the structural problems with corporate for-profit media. I don't know how much Folks pay attention to whether the news media they're consuming is for-profit or nonprofit. So let's just mention a few long-standing nonprofit national outlets. Of course, there's public broadcasting, supported in part by the audience, including PBS and NPR, but also the Pacifica Network, which is best known for Democracy Now!
Others include ProPublica, The Intercept, the Center for Investigative Reporting, which produces Mother Jones magazine, and also Reveal, the investigative podcast and public radio show.
Scene on Radio has partnered with Reveal a couple of times. There's a bunch of nonprofits that operate at the local and regional level. To name a few, the Texas Tribune, the Mississippi Free Press, the Baltimore Banner, in New York, Documented and the City Reporter, Outlier Media in Detroit, Resolve Philly, and in Chicago, City Bureau.
All those organizations are doing really exciting stuff. And most of them have an explicit bottom-up mission, telling the stories of regular people and inviting community folks to shape their reporting. These outlets can fill important gaps, but their impact does have some limits up against the media giants. Small nonprofits only have resources to do so much, and they usually don't attract the same kind of audience that the big fish do.
To give a sense of the challenge, the journalism school at Northwestern counted almost 700 standalone digital news sites across the country in 2025. That includes nonprofit and for-profit newsrooms. But those 700 organizations don't come close to replacing the more than 3,000 local newspapers that have gone under in the last 20 years.
The reality is that philanthropy is not going to solve the structural problems with our news media. There aren't enough foundation grants to support a robust news ecosystem.
And the grants that are given go overwhelmingly to newsrooms in big cities. The J School at Northwestern found that 95% of foundation dollars for journalism go to outlets in urban places. So that's not fixing most of the news desert problem. As for government and the role that the public sector can play in helping journalism survive,
well, we know that's not happening at the federal level right now. Asking what the Trump administration is going to do to strengthen independent journalism is like asking how many wind turbines it's going to build. It's just... But some state governments understand the crisis and are trying to do something about it.
Yes, various states have considered taking action, and a few have passed bills. For example, offering tax credits to help newsrooms hire or keep their reporters, or creating scholarship programs for future journalists. Illinois passed the Strengthening Community Media Act, which took effect in 2025. One part of that law requires owners of news organizations to give several months' notice if they plan to sell to an out-of-state buyer. That's meant to give local groups a chance to make offers and maybe prevent some sales to big chains and corporations.
These efforts are small so far, but they show there's a growing recognition that governments should be involved in shoring up the news media.
For anyone interested in finding out if anything along these lines is happening in their state, a group called the Media Power Collaborative is tracking programs or proposals in more than 15 states, all projects aimed at supporting local news.
A federal jury ruled against former Alaska Governor Sarah Palin in a defamation lawsuit against the New York Times. Palin sued the newspaper in 2017.
One more threat to journalism that people are working to guard against. Powerful people filing frivolous lawsuits against reporters and news organizations to create hassles and force them to hire lawyers to defend themselves. Your school, Chenj, the Arthur L. Carter Journalism Institute at NYU, has created a database tracking alleged SLAPs, that's strategic lawsuits against public participation.
Yes.
The goal of the database is to shine a light on these lawsuits that are designed to have a chilling effect on journalism. An example of a SLAP, in the 2010s, the nonprofit Mother Jones said it spent $3 million in legal fees defending itself against a defamation lawsuit by a donor to presidential candidate Mitt Romney. Meanwhile, the U.S. Supreme Court here in the summer of 2026 declined to take up a case that could have challenged the landmark ruling Sullivan v. the New York Times from 1964. That's the case that creates a high bar of actual malice for people suing news organizations for defamation, basically protecting journalists who make mistakes in good faith. A couple members of the court have expressed an interest in revisiting Sullivan, but for now, that important protection of journalists' First Amendment rights lives on.
Before we wrap up this survival category, let's take a minute to talk about the international perspective. We've talked a lot about the U.S. being an outlier among rich countries and having a mostly corporate system and weak public media. But other countries are facing similar problems. They might have lessons for us in the U.S.
The Canadian government in 2019 launched a $600 million initiative to support the nation's news industry, including a tax credit that reimburses folks for a fraction of what they spend on news subscriptions. So really just a government subsidy for the press. In France, funding for the public broadcasting system has gone down, and far-right parties have proposed defunding the system almost entirely.
Sounds familiar.
In response, a coalition of independent news outlets, journalists, and nonprofit leaders launched a public interest cooperative called Co-op Media, where citizens and media organizations can buy in and help fund independent journalism ventures. They'd raised about 2 million euros, last I heard, and about 70 independent outlets, including some that are well known nationally, have joined the cooperative.
So that's bucket number one, folks working hard to keep good journalism alive. But next, we want to move past survival mode, right? What is the journalism system that we want? What is the systemic change that could bring us a much stronger media system? And what would it take to make that happen?
We have talked a few times on Scene on Radio about public goods and how they went so badly out of style in our time of raging neoliberalism.
But we got to come up with a sexier name for them. I mean, it sounds so boring,
right?
You know what I mean? But
it sounds so earnest.
But public good, yeah. But meanwhile, these are things I love: public schools, public parks, public libraries. And of course, radical institutions like the post office.
Right? All of that stuff, it seems, I don't know, a little bit communist now. Or we should probably just say woke. Right? The Postal Service is woke.
Yeah. You know, I got to say, man, I'm so glad people created these things a century or two ago. Because could you imagine somebody proposing these things right now, like at a time when the mantra is, if the market doesn't provide it, you know, we're not going to have it.
We're better off without it, yeah.
And then somebody's like, yeah, what about if we had all these public goods?
And when I say public goods went out of style, I'm saying that with a look on my face, because we know that's not exactly what happened.
Nah, I mean, public goods were systematically discredited by people who want a price tag on everything and the politicians who represent those folks.
But, you know, who knows? Maybe those of us who want more nice things will finally get together and turn things around. That could even happen soonish. But before we get to the question of how to build the power to create big change, it's worth thinking about the world we want to live in. In this case, the kind of news and information system we want to build. So this gets us to the second item on our agenda, Chenj, imagining the journalism we want.
Yeah, man. You know, it's like, I mean, there was plenty about telling people that all public institutions are too woke or that every new idea someone has is unrealistic, is that you're also telling people we can't dream, right? But meanwhile, all those different institutions that we listed were systems that movements dreamt and struggled into existence. And I think it's also important because it's not like nobody has thought about these things or has any idea what to do.
Yeah.
I mean, some stuff is very easy to imagine, right? Like low-hanging fruit, like building enough political power to restore the corporation for public broadcasting. And of course, you should fund it like you never have before. I mean, under that scenario, you might have a public media system as strong as other rich countries have.
You mean that the richest country in the world, in the aggregate, a nation with $1 trillion defense budget, could potentially spend as much per capita on public media as Switzerland does or Norway?
Yeah, I know.
Come on.
Crazy talk, right?
Pie in the sky.
We could also revive and build on some of those rules that were killed off over the last few decades that required media organizations to serve the public and not just their shareholders.
And maybe some limitations on ownership, right? And corporate concentration in the media. We could bring those back. But people have come up with other bold plans, too. I think the kind of thing that most of us are not used to hearing about. And let's bring in Victor Pickard again of the University of Pennsylvania. He's one of the leading thinkers about media, what's gone wrong and how we could transform it. And he represents a set of progressive ideas that have been around for quite a while, right?
For sure, including from folks like the late Robert McChesney. He was a mentor to Victor and to a lot of us who study media.
This is one of Victor's proposals.
If there is no commercial future for journalism, we need to find a non-commercial future. And, I think the obvious choice is to try to create some kind of public media system. And I don't mean just throwing some more money at NPR and PBS, but actually perhaps building upon that ready-made public infrastructure along with post offices and, public libraries. Like, we've got these wonderful public resources and spaces, but to use those as building blocks towards a new national but very localized public media system.
So Victor's talking about a very different kind of public media. You could almost imagine it as a whole other layer that would exist alongside the one we're familiar with.
And, I've argued, and it sounds very utopian on its face, but I think it's also very practical that we need to imagine a new kind of anchor institution, what I refer to as a public media center, PMC, where every community has this local public space. Again, it might be in a post office, it might be in a public library, it might be in a former public broadcasting outlet. It serves as a multimedia hub, and it's actually owned and controlled by local communities themselves. So really what I'm calling for is a public media system that's public not just in name, but it's actually owned and controlled by the public. It's federally guaranteed, but locally governed.
Notice Victor's last words, locally governed. So he's imagining a federally funded system, and one funded on a much bigger scale than America's half-hearted venture into public media ever was.
He envisions the government spending billions and maybe tens of billions of dollars a year on this network of media centers. But again, the decisions about how to spend that money would be made in local communities.
We do this with other essential public goods. The federal government spends tens of billions of dollars a year on roads and highways, and a lot of that money goes to grants for projects that people want at the state or local level.
Why couldn't we have a media system like that? If we understand that a high-quality news and information system that's accessible to everyone is just as necessary as the roads and bridges we use to get around.
When you said accessible to everyone, it made me think about participatory media. As Victor has put it, and actually lots of folks, we need news not just about and for the people or about and for diverse communities, but also news by the people. So if you're not satisfied with the media, you could be the media. And look, I know there's people who are like, well, what about social media? I'm being the media on social media. And I think that's good. But, I used to go to a lot of protests related to police brutality, for example, John, and one thing I saw was like everybody would go to that place and be making social media. But it was different when you had a local institution really reporting that's going to be there year round. You know what I'm saying? It just makes a difference in how communities get reported on. And actually, I think a lot of us could be producers and storytellers and really learn this craft and be supported through these public media centers.
Think about what that could mean in a news desert. like those places in southeastern North Carolina that we visited in this series. If you give everyone, potentially, access to the tools of media making, you probably start to have more people doing journalism in places where there's a real scarcity of reporters now. And that could have an effect on how people engage in the life of their communities. Here's a separate proposal to democratize the media system. And I'm sure you know about this, Chenj, because it was championed by your late, great colleague, Robert McChesney. He died too young in 2025. His idea was federal vouchers for individual Americans to support the nonprofit journalism of our choice.
Yes. So this is based on an idea first proposed by an economist named Dean Baker more than 20 years ago to support creative work more broadly. So McChesney published a book in 2013, and listen to this title, Digital Disconnect: How Capitalism is Turning the Internet Against Democracy.
Capitalism undermining democracy. Okay, who would have thunk it?
And in that book, Bob proposed that the government would give every American a voucher. At the time, he was suggesting $200 a year, that each of us could donate to a nonprofit, non-commercial journalism outlet. It could be a public radio station or a national investigative publication or a community news source in your neighborhood.
This is Robert McChesney talking about the idea in an interview with C-SPAN in 2013.
The government would have no control over who got the money. It'd be purely up to individuals how they wanted to dedicate their $200. And this would mean that all those websites right now that are just absolutely struggling, if they could convince 2,000 people in their community to give them their $200, well, suddenly 2,000 people, that generates $400,000. Well, you can actually have a heck of a good product in a neighborhood of a community of $400,000. If you do a great job the next year, you might have 10 times that much. So you produce great competition. You have no government control. You have a massive public subsidy. So we can, again, have people make a living doing journalism in competing newsrooms.
I like this idea. And look, he talks about what a small journalism outfit could do with $400,000. The Border Belt Independent got off the ground with a $500,000 grant. So imagine that any group of a few thousand people could use their vouchers to support a journalistic resource like that for their community or their region.
Right. Bob was imagining that each of us would get a $200 voucher. I mean, that's... Here in New York, that's like the price of 2 drinks. But I mean, seriously, like, talk about a small d democratic way of bolstering independent news and media making. These are the kind of ideas we could be talking about and politicians could be debating if we had any kind of healthy understanding of how essential a robust, independent news media is in a democratic society.
Now, ideas like these from Pickard and McChesney may sound like a pipe dream in our political environment in 2026. You heard Victor himself say his publicly funded media center plan sounds utopian.
I mean, the shift in our politics and economy that it would take to make stuff like that possible feels very far away. I get it. But this is where I want to segue to that third category of action. You know, journalists, we're used to documenting the fight, reporting about the fight. When it comes to this, our media systems, I think we have to fight. We have to build the power to make the change we want to see. And the first thing to understand is that a transformation of our media system is only going to come about in alignment with other movements on other issues.
Yeah, you can't really imagine these things happening in a vacuum, separate from other deep changes that would almost necessarily be happening at the same time, right? Changes in our economic reality, changes in our political system that is so deeply captured and controlled by the very richest people, and so on.
And look, one of the most self-defeating things I think we can do is to shrug and go, well, that'll never happen. Because the people who did this to our media system, they don't think like that. Right? I mean, and there's a lot of people who thought the absurd situation that the U.S. is in right now with a brazenly authoritarian regime in power, people thought that couldn't happen. But, you know, folks on the far right and in the corporate class were like, nah, we think it can happen. And they got to work for decades to bring us to this place.
Victor Pickard made that point in our interview. He says we should be pushing for the media system we want in the year 2050.
Other political interests in society have been very successful about, planning and incubating these ideas that take many decades to come to fruition. And I think we're living through that scenario right now under the Trump administration. So I do think that, progressives need to also, and not, I don't mean to just say political progressives, just people, and I think this is a bipartisan concern, people who recognize that what we all learn in school is true. We need a free and functional news media system for democracy to survive. And that's how we need to start framing this.
Victor's talking about a change in mindset that should lead to action. We have to put away the passive acceptance of a corporate-dominated media system that's not working. I mean, it's working for those who control it, but it's not working for the rest of us. And the thing is, if you listen to this season, we wouldn't be the first generation to fight that fight. Think about all the journalists in the alternative press, from Ida B. Wells to Ida Tarbell and the other muckrakers.
And the media critics and reformers, the people who called out yellow journalism in the early 20th century, the ones who led the public interest moment in the middle of the last century that brought us public broadcasting and other really valuable changes.
And all the people still fighting now, folks in the alternative and nonprofit media, independent journalists, and yes, folks working in corporate and mainstream media who do what they can to report the most important stuff. We can't lose sight of the sacrifices and contributions that all those people have made over the years. And I actually feel them looking at us now and going, yeah, you're right to be pissed, but these problems didn't start with you, and you don't get to give up.
There's a message there for all of us, I think, about doing what we can to make the state of American journalism a live issue, right? One that politicians are asked about and have to do something about. We need to pressure people with power to take a position. We can also be thoughtful in our choices individually about the kind of media we consume and spend our money to support. But it really has to be about systemic change, doesn't it? So, Chenj, maybe this is a fitting note to end on. You alluded to journalists, but say more about journalists themselves. What would you want to say to them, to us, about the role we need to play in moving towards a better and more democratic news and information system?
When we get into the kind of crises that we tend to get into, a lot of journalists I know, folks who are skilled and well-meaning, tend to just report harder. We just report more, and that's what we think our job is. And yes, this series has established that the best journalists don't sit on the sidelines, but it has to be more than that. Journalists don't get a pass on organizing and participating in movements unless we expect everybody else to fight for our most important institutions while we kick back and write and hold mics and cameras and just describe shit, right? I mean, we're at a point where we have to fight to keep our microphones and to keep the channels of communication open. And actually, a crucial piece of this is the only way we're going to win is if we can merge or join with the power of other movements, with millions of people who have stakes in this fight, but who also can bring legal power, policy power, political power. In many places, who can register voters, protest, create media pressure, strike, and shut shit down. And then when they ask what we want, news media has to be right there on the list with everything else. There's one thing I've learned about this country and really this world. It's movement power that allows us to assert our better visions when the mechanisms of democracy and education have been co-opted. Movement power is crucial for democracy. And for those who understand that, it's probably because people on the street and journalists are reporting it.
There's a quote that feels relevant here. I don't know if you've heard it. It goes like this: only a crisis produces real change. When that crisis occurs, the actions that are taken depend on the ideas that are lying around, right? And the person who said this went on to say that that's what you have to do if you want deep change. You develop alternatives, right? Imagine the world you want. And you keep those ideas alive until the politically impossible becomes politically inevitable.
Until the politically impossible becomes politically inevitable. It sounds powerful.
So now who said it? Milton Friedman, the arch-conservative, neoliberal economist.
John, why would you why would you have me feeling feelings about a quote from Milton Friedman? But I actually think it's actually really instructive that quote comes from Friedman, because it shows that, the people who were invested in attacking public goods and really, in a lot of ways, attacking the foundations of democracy, they're clear on building power, and I think that, if anything, underscores the fact that we got to get clear on it and get clear about what we have to do.
Yeah, I think as a theory of change, it's spot on.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Thanks so much, man, for coming back and making another season with Scene on Radio. It is always such a great pleasure and honor to work with you.
Man, thanks for the reporting you did, John. You really, you gave a big part of your life to this, man, and I really appreciate it. And I really hope that this series gives us a better vocabulary and a place to start, to try to change this.
Watch this space. This is probably not the last word on this season and on the news. The News was created and produced by me, John Biewen, with Chenjerai Kumanyika and story editor Diane Hodson. Assistant producer Arlene Arevalo. Fact-checking by Anna Pujol Mazzini. Music by Brian Blade and the Fellowship Band, Michelle Osis, Lily Hayden, Alex Weston, James Nathan Jones, Goodnight Lucas, and Jason Hill. Music consulting by Joe Augustine of Narrative Music. You can find transcripts and other information about the show and the team at our website, sceneonradio.org. Big thanks to everyone at the Kenan Institute, which made this season possible. In particular, Sarah Rogers, our head of communications, and Institute Director David Toole. No generative AI was used in the research, writing, production, or any other facet of this project. The show is distributed by our good friends at PRX. Scene on Radio comes to you from the Kenan Institute for Ethics at Duke University.